Go back to Africa where you belong. The words cut through Chicago. O'Hare Airport's Gate 18, like a blade through silk, stopping conversations mid-sentence and freezing coffee cups halfway to lips. The morning rush hour suddenly felt suspended in time, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire terminal's rhythm. Every head turned toward the source of the venom, where a man in an expensive gray business suit stood pointing his finger like a weapon at a woman whose calm presence seemed to absorb his rage without reflecting it back. Diana Brooks adjusted her navy blazer with the kind of grace that comes from years of navigating turbulence both in the sky and on the ground. The subtle pilot wings pinned to her lapel caught the harsh fluorescent light gleaming like a quiet promise that some storms are meant to be weathered with dignity. She didn't step back, didn't raise her voice, didn't give the man in gray what he clearly wanted, which was a reaction that would justify his next move. Richard Coleman's face flushed red with the confidence of someone who had never been told. No, never been challenged. Never been held accountable for the poison that spilled from his mouth when he thought the world belonged to him. He was the kind of man who believed boarding passes came with the right to decide who deserved to be where, as if altitude was something he personally controlled. His pharmaceutical sales director badge hung from his neck like a medal he thought granted him authority over strangers. The growing circle of witnesses felt the electricity in the air that moment when everyone knows something significant is about to happen, but no one knows quite what. Phones began lifting slowly, almost instinctively, as travelers recognized that they were witnessing something that would matter beyond this moment. The airport security guards looked at each other with the uncertain shuffle of people who weren't sure whose side they were supposed to be on, which was exactly the problem that had created this moment in the first place. Diana's silence was working harder than any words could have, drawing the attention away from Richard's noise and toward something more substantial. She had learned long ago that power didn't need to announce itself, that authority was something you carried rather than something you claimed. The contrast between his shouting and her stillness created a kind of gravitational pull, making everyone in the terminal understand instinctively who held the real power in this exchange. Around them, the crowd began splitting into two distinct groups, the curious ones who moved closer to see what would happen next, and the uncomfortable ones who suddenly found reasons to study their phones or examine the departure boards. But even the uncomfortable ones kept glancing back, drawn by the magnetic tension of a moment when someone's assumptions were about to meet reality in the most public way possible. Richard jabbed his finger toward Diana's chest again, his voice carrying the kind of poison that hides behind corporate smiles and networking events. You people always think you can cut the line. Always think you own the place. He snarled his words designed to wound and humiliate. But Diana remained perfectly still, her expression neither angry nor afraid, just quietly authoritative in a way that clearly confused him. The terminal's background noise seemed to fade into white static, as this confrontation became the only thing that mattered in this space. Coffee machines stopped hissing, rolling suitcases paused their journey, and even the constant stream of announcements seemed to quiet down, as if the entire airport was holding its breath to see what would happen when entitlement finally met its match. 15 years earlier, Diana had sat in a small office at flight school in Dallas, rain hammering against the windows, while her instructor shuffled through her perfect test scores with the kind of frown that suggested her success was somehow problematic. She had just aced her simulator exam, the only woman in her group to achieve a flawless performance. But the man behind the desk looked like someone who had just received disappointing news rather than impressive results. Carter, he had said, using her maiden name with the tone of someone delivering bad news. You've got the hands for this. I'll give you that. But you don't have the look that airlines want. You understand what I'm trying to tell you, right? His meaning was crystal clear, even though his words danced around it, the same dance that had been performed for generations whenever someone decided that competence wasn't enough if it came in the wrong package. That night, Diana had sat in her car in the parking lot until sunrise, watching planes take off one by one, each of them piloted by someone who supposedly fit the image that the industry demanded. Her tears had dried before dawn, but somewhere between exhaustion and fury, she had made a promise that would shape every decision she made for the next decade and a half. If they wouldn't change the rules to let her in, she would build her own airline and write new rules entirely. Now, standing in this terminal with Richard Coleman's finger pointing at her like an accusation, that promise felt like the foundation beneath her feet. She pulled out her boarding pass with the same calm precision she used to navigate storm systems, holding it just long enough for Richard to see the words, "First Class Seat 1A," before sliding it back into her blazer pocket. His confusion was immediate and obvious, the kind of mental stuttering that happens when reality refuses to match expectations. Behind her, a pilot in full uniform had stopped mid-step, recognizing Diana immediately but staying silent on her subtle signal. Captain Williams had been waiting for this moment for 6 months, ever since Diana had announced she was stepping back into the cockpit for this particular flight. The crew had been briefed, the protocols had been set, and now they were watching their CEO handle ignorance with the same steady competence she used to run a multi-million-dollar airline. Diana's encrypted phone buzzed softly against her hip, a gentle reminder of the board meeting she was supposed to attend later that day, the quarterly reports that needed her signature, the expansion plans that required her approval. She was returning to the cockpit after 6 months of pure executive duties, choosing to fly this particular route because sometimes leaders needed to remember where their power actually came from. Sometimes you had to touch the sky to remember why you'd fought so hard to reach it. The corporate power she carried was invisible to Richard, hidden behind the quiet authority of someone who had built something instead of just inheriting it. He saw a woman who didn't fit his narrow definition of who belonged in first class, completely missing the irony that she had literally created the class structure he thought he understood. This flight wasn't just her return to the cockpit. It was a reminder to herself and everyone watching that power came in forms that couldn't be prejudged or dismissed. As Diana moved toward the boarding gate with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned the plane, she was about to fly. Richard's confusion deepened into something approaching panic. He had expected submission, had counted on intimidation, had built his entire approach around the assumption that his loudness would silence her voice. Instead, he found himself watching her walk away from him with the kind of dignity that made his aggression look small and petty and ultimately meaningless. The other passengers in line began to murmur among themselves, phones, still recording attention, still focused on the aftermath of his outburst. Some were already Googling Horizon Airlines and first-class boarding, trying to piece together why this woman's calm response felt so much more powerful than his angry words. They didn't know yet that they were watching a master class in leadership, but they could sense that something important was happening right in front of them. Richard pulled out his phone with the frantic energy of someone who needed to control a narrative that was already slipping away from him. His fingers moving rapidly across the screen as he crafted what he thought was a clever social media rant about airport chaos and declining standards. He positioned himself where other passengers could see him filming, wanting witnesses to what he imagined was his righteous indignation about the breakdown of proper social order. "Can you believe this?" he muttered to anyone within earshot, his voice carrying that conspiratorial tone that people use when they think they're revealing some universal truth. They let anyone into first class these days, completely destroying the exclusivity that makes premium travel worth paying for. He held his phone at arm's length, filming himself with the confidence of someone who believed his opinions mattered to the world. His LinkedIn post went live within minutes, a carefully worded complaint about diversity initiatives compromising service standards that he thought was subtle enough to avoid direct accusations while still making his point clear. The post began gathering likes from his network. Immediately, other pharmaceutical sales executives and corporate middle managers who shared his view that the world was changing in ways that threatened their comfortable assumptions about who deserved what. Meanwhile, at the gate desk, flight attendant Sophia Martinez recognized Diana immediately and felt her pulse quicken with a mixture of professional excitement and personal pride. She had studied Diana's career trajectory in flight school, had written papers about her leadership style, had even attended a conference where Diana spoke about building inclusive excellence in the aviation industry. Now she was about to work a flight where Diana would be returning to the cockpit after months of pure executive duties. Sophia caught the eye of Captain Williams, who was reviewing the flight plan with the kind of calm focus that experienced pilots brought to every departure. They had been briefed about Diana's identity and given strict instructions to maintain confidentiality until she decided to reveal herself. The crew understood they were about to be part of something special, even if they didn't yet know just how special it would become. The passenger dynamics in the boarding area had shifted subtly but significantly, with travelers positioning themselves to get better views of whatever might happen next. Some were openly recording with their phones while others tried to be discreet about their documentation, but everyone seemed to sense that this ordinary Tuesday morning flight was turning into something worth remembering. The energy felt electric, charged with possibility and anticipation. Other passengers began whispering among themselves, sharing theories about why the woman in the navy blazer had seemed so unaffected by Richard's verbal attack. "Did you see how calm she stayed?" one woman murmured to her traveling companion. "Like she's used to dealing with people like that." Another passenger was already researching Horizon Airlines on his tablet, curious about the company's background and leadership structure. The gate agent made the first boarding announcement with professional cheerfulness, her voice cutting through the terminal noise to signal the beginning of the next phase of this unfolding drama. "We're now boarding all passengers with special assistance and first-class tickets for Flight 847 to Atlanta," she said. And Diana stepped forward with the smooth confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Richard watched her approach the gate with growing irritation, unable to understand why his intimidation tactics had failed so completely. He had built a career on reading people, on knowing how to apply pressure in exactly the right places to get what he wanted, but Diana's response had been unlike anything in his experience. She hadn't fought back, hadn't backed down, hadn't given him any of the reactions he knew how to handle. As Diana handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, Sophia stepped closer to get a better view of the woman she had studied and admired from afar. The moment felt surreal, like watching a historical figure step out of a textbook and into real life. She knew she was about to be part of whatever happened next, and the responsibility of that moment settled over her like a uniform she was proud to wear. Richard's frustration reached a boiling point as he watched Diana disappear down the jet bridge, her quiet dignity making his loud aggression look increasingly pathetic. He stormed over to the gate agent with the entitled swagger of someone who believed customer service existed to validate his worldview, demanding to speak with management about what he called the inappropriate behavior of other passengers. That woman was cutting in line being disruptive, and frankly, "I don't think she belongs in first class," he told the gate agent, his voice loud enough to ensure nearby passengers could hear his complaint. The gate agent smiled with the practiced politeness of someone who dealt with difficult passengers every day, nodding sympathetically while making notes that Richard couldn't see. His social media posts were gaining traction among his network with dozens of comments from people who shared his frustration about what they perceived as the decline of traditional standards. The echo chamber was working exactly as intended, validating his anger and encouraging him to believe that he was fighting some kind of righteous battle against the forces of chaos and inappropriate inclusion. But what Richard didn't know was that every word of his complaint was being recorded by the airport's security system, automatically flagged by Horizon's monitoring protocols whenever their company name was mentioned in connection with discrimination complaints. The artificial intelligence system had already created an incident report, cross-referenced his identity with his ticket information, and begun the documentation process that would become crucial in the hours ahead. Diana, meanwhile, was making her way through the crew preparation area with the focused calm of someone returning to a role that fit her like a second skin. She changed from her executive blazer into her pilot's uniform with the ritual precision of someone who understood that clothing was more than fabric. It was identity and authority and responsibility, all woven together into something that commanded respect. The flight plan spread across her tablet showed a routine, too. 5-hour journey from Chicago to Atlanta, the kind of flight she had completed hundreds of times before her executive duties began consuming her schedule. But this wasn't a routine flight, not with Richard Coleman in seat 2A, and not with the entire crew aware that their CEO was about to demonstrate personally why Horizon Airlines had become known for its uncompromising commitment to passenger dignity. Sophia was completing her pre-flight briefing when she received the discreet notification about Diana's activation of the Dignity Protocol Horizon's comprehensive system for documenting and addressing discrimination incidents. The protocol had been Diana's innovation, created after she had experienced enough discrimination herself to understand that documentation was the first step toward accountability and change. The system worked by creating multiple layers of evidence, from security camera footage to social media monitoring to witness statements, building an unshakable foundation for whatever consequences might follow. It wasn't about punishment. Diana had always insisted it was about education and prevention, and making sure that every passenger understood that respect wasn't optional at 30,000 feet. Captain Williams received his own notification about the protocol activation, along with instructions to maintain normal flight operations, while ensuring that all interactions with passengers were being recorded through the aircraft's internal monitoring system. The crew understood they were about to become part of a teaching moment that could have impact far beyond this single flight. As passengers began filing onto the aircraft, the atmosphere felt charged with possibility and tension in equal measure. Richard boarded with the swagger of someone who thought he had established his dominance, completely unaware that he was walking into a situation where every assumption he had made about power and privilege was about to be challenged in the most public and permanent way possible. The stage was set for a confrontation that would transform an ordinary Tuesday morning flight into a viral moment of accountability, with Diana Brooks preparing to demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful response to ignorance was simply to show people exactly who you really were and let the truth speak for itself. The aircraft's cabin felt different once Diana stepped through the cockpit door, as if the very air molecules had reorganized themselves around a new center of gravity. Captain Williams looked up from his pre-flight checklist with the kind of smile reserved for reunions with old friends, except this friendship was built on mutual respect for the sky and everything it demanded of those who dared to claim it as their workplace. "Welcome back to the office," Williams said with genuine warmth, gesturing toward the captain's seat that Diana had been away from for 6 months of boardrooms and quarterly reports and strategic planning sessions. "Everything's ready for your return, and I have to say it's good to see you where you belong again." The instruments glowed green and ready, each button and switch familiar under her fingers like letters in an alphabet she had never forgotten how to read. Diana settled into the pilot's seat with the fluid motion of someone returning home after a long journey, her hands moving across the control panel with muscle memory that 6 months of executive duties hadn't been able to erase. Every switch responded to her touch like an old friend welcoming her back, and she felt the tension in her shoulders release as she remembered why she had fallen in love with flying in the first place. The pre-flight checks proceeded with the calm efficiency that came from thousands of hours of experience, each item on the list completed with the precision that kept tons of metal suspended safely in the air. But this routine felt different, charged with the knowledge that Richard Coleman was sitting in seat 2, completely unaware that the woman he had attacked in the terminal was now responsible for his life and the lives of every other person on this aircraft. When Diana's voice came over the intercom for the first time, smooth and professional, and carrying the quiet authority that made nervous passengers feel safe, Richard felt something cold settle in his stomach. The voice was familiar in a way that made him question his own memory, a connection his brain didn't want to make because the implications were too uncomfortable to consider. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking," Diana said, her tone carrying the perfect balance of warmth and competence that experienced pilots use to calm turbulence before it even began. "Welcome aboard Horizon Airlines Flight 847 from Chicago to Atlanta. Flight time today will be approximately 2.5 hours, and we're expecting smooth skies for most of our journey." Richard's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling across the screen as he tried to search for information that he suddenly needed desperately to have. "Horizon Airlines, Captain." He typed, then deleted it, then typed it again, his mind refusing to accept what his instincts were already telling him. The search results that appeared made his face drain of color, each line of text confirming what he had hoped was impossible. Captain Diana Brooks, CEO and Chief Pilot of Horizon Airlines. The first result read, accompanied by a professional headshot that showed the same calm eyes and quiet confidence he had encountered in the terminal. First African-American woman to found and operate a major regional airline with over 3,000 flight hours and a master's degree in aeronautical engineering. Sophia Martinez moved through the cabin with professional grace, checking seatbelts and overhead compartments while keeping one eye on Richard's increasingly agitated behavior. She had been trained to read passenger stress signals, and everything about Richard's body language suggested someone who was beginning to understand that he had made a very serious mistake. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, and his hands kept moving from his phone to his seatbelt to his forehead in nervous repetition. The other passengers sensed the shift in energy without fully understanding its source, conversations becoming quieter and more attentive, as if everyone could feel that something significant was building beneath the surface of this ordinary flight. Some were still recording discreetly with their phones, documenting whatever came next with the instinct of people who understood they were witnessing something important. Diana's second announcement came as the aircraft began its taxi toward the runway, her voice carrying a hint of something that made every passenger pay attention, even if they couldn't identify exactly what had changed. "This is Captain Brooks again, and I want to thank you for choosing Horizon Airlines for your travel today. We're committed to ensuring that every passenger feels safe, respected, and valued throughout their journey with us." The emphasis on her name was subtle but unmistakable, designed to give Richard and anyone else listening the information they needed to understand exactly who was in control of this aircraft. Williams glanced over at Diana with obvious admiration, understanding that he was watching a masterclass in leadership unfold in real time, each word chosen for maximum impact and minimum drama. Richard's Google search had expanded to include news articles about Diana's career interviews, about her experiences as a black woman in aviation, and features about Horizon Airlines' industry-leading policies on passenger rights and dignity. Every article he read made his situation worse, painting a picture of a woman who had built her entire career around fighting exactly the kind of behavior he had displayed in the terminal. As the engines began their final preparation for takeoff, Diana's hands moved across the controls with the confidence of someone who had earned her place through competence rather than connections. The aircraft responded to her touch like a symphony orchestra following a conductor's baton, every system working in perfect harmony under her guidance. This was her element, her expertise, her domain, and everyone on board was about to understand exactly what that meant. At 30,000 feet, the cabin had settled into the peaceful rhythm that experienced air travelers knew and trusted, with overhead bins, secure seatbelts fastened, and the gentle hum of engines providing a white noise backdrop for quiet conversations and electronic entertainment. But Richard Coleman sat rigid in seat 2A, his knuckles white as he gripped his armrests and stared at the cockpit door as if he could will it to reveal different truths than the ones his phone had just confirmed. The flight attendant call button above his seat chimed with increasing frequency as Richard pressed it repeatedly, each ring echoing through the cabin like a distress signal that no one particularly wanted to answer. When Sophia finally approached his row with professional patience, Her smile carried the kind of politeness that service workers perfected when dealing with difficult customers who didn't understand that their behavior was being documented. "Yes, sir. How can I help you this morning?" Sophia asked, her tone maintaining perfect neutrality, despite the fact that she had been watching Richard's growing panic for the past 20 minutes. She could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the rapid breathing, the desperate phone searches that kept confirming what he didn't want to believe about his situation. "I need to speak with someone in charge," Richard said, his voice carrying the tremor of someone whose confidence had abandoned him somewhere over the Illinois countryside. "There's been some kind of mistake, some kind of mix-up, and I need to get this sorted out immediately." His words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other in his desperation to find someone who could undo what couldn't be undone. Sophia's response was calm and measured, delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that made difficult situations more difficult for people who were accustomed to intimidating their way out of consequences. "Sir Captain Brooks is currently flying the aircraft, which means she's a bit occupied at the moment, but I'd be happy to take a message for her if you'd like to share your concerns." The deliberate use of Diana's name and title hit Richard like a physical blow, confirmation delivered with surgical precision that left no room for doubt or denial. He slumped back in his seat as the reality of his situation began to sink in, understanding, for the first time, that his assumption about who belonged where had just collided with the truth in the most public and permanent way possible. From the cockpit, Diana's voice filled the cabin again, this time with an announcement that carried layers of meaning for anyone paying attention to the subtext. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Brooks speaking, and I want to take a moment to clarify something for our passengers today. I'm not only your captain for this flight, but also the Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Airlines, which means your safety and comfort are my personal responsibility." The cabin fell silent except for the sound of engines and the barely audible intake of breath from passengers who were beginning to understand the scope of what they were witnessing. Phones appeared again, some discreet and others boldly visible, as travelers realized they were documenting something that would matter beyond this moment, something that would be shared and discussed and remembered long after the flight ended. Richard's face had progressed from pale to gray, his breathing becoming more shallow as the implications of Diana's announcement settled over him like a heavy blanket. He understood now that his terminal outburst hadn't just been recorded by random passengers, but by people who would be only too happy to share the story of how he had told the CEO of an airline to go back to Africa while standing in line to board her airplane. Diana continued her announcement with the calm authority of someone who understood exactly how much power she held in this moment and was choosing to wield it with precision rather than brutality. Horizon Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment, which means every passenger interaction is documented and reviewed to ensure that everyone feels safe and respected while traveling with us. The activation of what Diana called the Sky Clear Protocol sent a subtle but unmistakable signal throughout the aircraft, a soft tone followed by a brief message that appeared on the seatback screens. This flight is operating under enhanced monitoring protocols for passenger safety and quality assurance. Every passenger understood instinctively that something significant was happening, even if they didn't fully grasp the mechanics of what they were witnessing. Sophia moved through the cabin with increased attention to detail her training, having prepared her for exactly this kind of situation where passenger behavior needed to be documented and managed with professional expertise. She could see other travelers beginning to piece together. The story could sense the shift in energy as people realized they were watching accountability happen in real time at 30,000 feet. The woman across the aisle from Richard leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear her question. "Excuse me, sir, but aren't you the gentleman who was shouting at people in the terminal? The one who told that woman to go back to Africa?" Her question hung in the air like a challenge demanding an answer that Richard wasn't prepared to give. Diana's final words from the cockpit carried the weight of someone who had spent years turning discrimination into determination, someone who had built an airline from scratch because the existing industry hadn't been ready to make room for her vision of what professional aviation could become. "We're currently cruising at 30,000 feet with clear skies ahead, and I want every passenger to know that respect isn't just our policy, it's our promise." Richard's attempted apologies came out in stammered fragments, each word sounding more desperate than the last as he tried to find some combination of language that might undo what couldn't be undone. "I didn't mean anything personal," he said to Sophia, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was just having a bad morning, and sometimes people say things they don't really mean when they're stressed about travel." But Sophia had been trained by Diana herself in how to handle these situations, and her response carried the professional authority of someone representing a company that had built its reputation on treating every passenger with dignity, regardless of their ability to return that courtesy. "Mr. Coleman," she said, using his name from the passenger manifest with deliberate formality. "Our documentation system has already recorded your terminal behavior and your statements during boarding." The other passengers had become an audience, whether they wanted to be or not, drawn into this real-time demonstration of how accountability worked when it was applied consistently and without exception. The woman across the aisle from Richard had her phone positioned to capture his increasingly desperate attempts to explain away behavior that needed no explanation, only consequences. "Everyone saw what happened," said an elderly gentleman from row 3, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived long enough to recognize injustice when he saw it. "We all heard what you said to that woman, and now we all know exactly who that woman is." His words carried no malice, just the simple statement of facts that made Richard's position untenable. Sophia's next move was choreographed by company policy, but delivered with the kind of personal conviction that came from working for a leader she genuinely respected. "Sir, I'm going to need to complete an incident report based on your behavior, and you should understand that this documentation will be reviewed by Captain Brooks personally, along with our legal and human resources departments." The phrase legal and human resources hit Richard like cold water, finally making him understand that this wasn't just about embarrassment or social media mockery, but about professional consequences that could extend far beyond this single flight. His pharmaceutical sales career had taught him to read situations and adapt his approach accordingly. But this situation offered no exit strategy that would leave his reputation intact. From the cockpit, Diana monitored the situation through the aircraft's internal communication system, listening to the exchanges in the cabin with the calm attention of someone who had learned to manage crisis situations without escalating them unnecessarily. Her years of executive leadership had taught her that the most powerful responses often came from allowing people to demonstrate their own character rather than trying to argue them into better behavior. The live streaming had begun spontaneously, with passengers sharing the unfolding drama across social media platforms, in real time, each post adding another layer to a story that was growing beyond the confines of this aircraft. The hashtag Horizon Justice was already trending on Twitter, accompanied by videos and commentary that painted Richard's behavior in the harshest possible light. Captain Williams glanced over at Diana with obvious admiration, understanding that he was watching someone manage a complex human situation with the same steady competence she used to navigate weather systems and air traffic control challenges. "You're handling this perfectly," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Firm but fair, documented but not vindictive." Richard's phone buzzed with notifications that he was afraid to check messages from colleagues and clients who had seen the viral videos and were beginning to distance themselves from someone whose public behavior had become a liability to their own professional reputations. The pharmaceutical industry was competitive enough without being associated with someone who had become an internet symbol of workplace discrimination. Sophia's final statement to Richard carried the weight of institutional authority backed by personal conviction, delivered with the calm professionalism that made it impossible to argue with or dismiss. Mr. Coleman Captain Brooks will be personally reviewing this incident as part of our company's commitment to passenger dignity, and you can expect to hear from our customer relations team within 48 hours. The cabin had become a classroom where everyone was learning about accountability in action, watching how a well-run company responded to discrimination, not with anger or revenge, but with systematic documentation and professional consequences that served both justice and education. The lesson was being broadcast to thousands of viewers through social media, turning Richard's moment of prejudice into an unexpected education for anyone paying attention. As the aircraft continued its smooth flight toward Atlanta, Diana's voice came over the intercom one more time, delivering words that would be quoted and shared and remembered long after the flight ended. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're maintaining our cruising altitude with clear skies ahead, and I want every passenger to understand that mutual respect makes every journey smoother for everyone on board." The moment when Diana stepped out of the cockpit and into the cabin felt like a seismic shift, as if the aircraft's center of gravity had suddenly relocated itself around her presence. Every conversation stopped, every phone camera turned in her direction, and every passenger understood instinctively that they were about to witness something that would be discussed and analyzed and remembered for years to come. She moved down the aisle with the unhurried confidence of someone who had spent decades earning the right to command respect in spaces that hadn't always welcomed her presence. Her pilot's uniform crisp and professional, and carrying the weight of authority that came from competence rather than appointment. The contrast between her calm dignity and Richard's obvious panic created a tableau that perfectly illustrated the difference between earned power and assumed privilege. "Mr. Coleman," Diana said, stopping beside his row with the kind of presence that made everyone else in the cabin lean forward to hear what came next. Her voice carried no anger, no vindictiveness, just the steady authority of someone addressing a situation that required clarity and resolution. "I understand you wanted to speak with someone in charge, so here I am." Richard looked up at her with the expression of someone who had just realized that his assumptions about the world had been fundamentally wrong, that his understanding of who held power and who deserved respect had been based on prejudices that were now being exposed under the brightest possible spotlight. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly, his voice caught somewhere between his throat and his conscience. Diana continued speaking with the calm professionalism that had made her a successful CEO and would now make her a viral symbol of leadership under pressure. "You told me to go back to Africa this morning while I was waiting to board the aircraft, that I own the aircraft, that I'm currently flying on behalf of the airline that I built from nothing over the past 15 years. The cabin was so quiet that the engine noise seemed amplified, creating a backdrop for Diana's words that made every syllable carry additional weight. Passengers held their phones steadily, understanding that they were documenting something historic, something that would be shown in business schools and leadership seminars and diversity training sessions for decades to come. I want you to understand something very clearly." Diana continued her tone, never rising above conversational level, despite the fact that her words were reaching an audience of millions through the live streams and recordings happening throughout the cabin. "Your behavior this morning wasn't just insulting to me personally, it was insulting to every passenger who trusts our airline to treat them with dignity, regardless of what they look like or where they come from." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but Diana raised her hand slightly, the gesture carrying enough authority to silence him without force or rudeness. She had learned long ago that real power didn't need to shout or threaten, it just needed to be present and consistent and absolutely clear about its expectations. Her next words would be quoted in newspaper editorials and congressional speeches and graduation ceremonies. "This aircraft is currently traveling at 30,000 feet because of people who look like me, people who were told for generations that we didn't belong in cockpits or boardrooms or first-class cabins," she said, her voice carrying the weight of history and hope in equal measure. "Every system on this plane, every safety protocol, every operational procedure exists because we refused to accept other people's limitations on our potential. Sofia Martinez stood in the galley watching her CEO handle this moment with the grace and strength that had made Horizon Airlines a symbol of excellence in an industry that hadn't always rewarded innovation or inclusion. She felt proud to be part of an organization that was demonstrating in real time what accountability looked like when it was applied with intelligence rather than emotion. The passengers had become more than witnesses. They had become participants in a moment that was changing how they understood power and prejudice and the responsibility that came with both. Some were crying quietly, moved by Diana's combination of strength and restraint. Others were nodding in recognition, understanding that they were seeing leadership that transcended titles and hierarchies and corporate structures. Diana's final words to Richard carried both closure and education, delivered with the kind of authority that came from years of turning discrimination into determination. Mr. Coleman, I hope this experience helps you understand that respect isn't something you get to distribute based on your personal prejudices. It's something you owe to every person you encounter, especially when you're sharing space with them 30,000 feet above the ground. She turned to address the entire cabin, her voice carrying the warmth that made nervous passengers feel safe and the strength that made difficult passengers understand their boundaries. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this necessary conversation. We'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta shortly, and I want every passenger to know that you're flying with an airline that believes dignity isn't an upgrade, it's standard equipment. The applause that followed wasn't the polite clapping that passengers sometimes gave after smooth landings, but something deeper and more meaningful, the sound of people recognizing that they had witnessed courage and competence and character operating at the highest possible level. As Diana walked back toward the cockpit, she carried with her the knowledge that she had transformed a moment of ignorance into a lesson that would reach far beyond the confines of this aircraft. The descent into Atlanta felt different from any landing the passengers had ever experienced, charged with the energy that comes after witnessing something that changes how you understand the world and your place in it. Diana's voice over the intercom was calm and professional as always, guiding the aircraft through its final approach with the same steady competence that had just turned a moment of discrimination into a masterclass in leadership and accountability. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, where the local time is 11:47 a.m. and the temperature is a pleasant 73 degrees. Diana announced her words, carrying no trace of the drama that had just unfolded in the cabin. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing, and passengers, please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position. As the aircraft touched down with barely a bump, the smooth landing serving as a final demonstration of Diana's professional competence, the cabin erupted in sustained applause that lasted well beyond the typical courtesy clapping. This applause carried meaning, recognition, gratitude, and respect, the sound of people who understood they had been part of something significant and wanted to acknowledge the skill and grace with which it had been handled. Through the aircraft windows, passengers could see an unusual amount of activity on the tarmac, including airport security vehicles, media vans, and what appeared to be news crews setting up equipment near the gate. Word of the incident had already spread through social media channels, turning a routine Tuesday morning flight into a news story that was growing by the minute as more people shared and commented on the videos and testimonials emerging from the aircraft. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Richard Coleman sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the full scope of the situation he had created through his moment of prejudiced entitlement. His phone screen showed a growing number of missed calls from his employer, his colleagues, and news outlets that had somehow obtained his contact information and wanted his comments on what was already being called the most dramatic in-flight confrontation of the year. Sofia Martinez moved through the cabin with professional efficiency, helping passengers gather their belongings while fielding questions from travelers who wanted to understand more about what they had witnessed and how they could support Diana and Horizon Airlines. Several passengers had already posted reviews praising the company's handling of the situation, creating a wave of positive publicity that would more than offset any negative attention from the incident itself. When the aircraft door opened, airport security officers boarded immediately, not to arrest anyone or escalate the situation, but to ensure that Richard's exit from the aircraft was documented and managed according to standard protocols for incidents involving passenger misconduct. Their presence was professional and calm, designed to protect everyone involved rather than to create additional drama or confrontation. Diana emerged from the cockpit to a standing ovation from the passengers who had spontaneously risen to acknowledge what she had accomplished during the flight. She accepted their recognition with the same grace she had shown throughout the crisis, nodding her thanks while maintaining the professional demeanor that had made her an effective leader and would now make her a symbol of courage under pressure. The first reporters reached Diana as she stepped off the aircraft, their questions rapid-fire and hungry for details about how she had handled Richard's attack and what message she hoped people would take from the incident. Her response was measured and thoughtful, focusing on the importance of treating every passenger with dignity rather than on the specific details of Richard's behavior or the consequences he might face. This wasn't about one passenger's poor choices, Diana told the cameras, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had guided the aircraft safely to its destination. This was about demonstrating that respect and professionalism are non-negotiable values, whether you're on the ground or at 30,000 feet. Every person who flies with us deserves to feel safe and valued, and that's a commitment we take seriously every day. Sophia gave her own statement to reporters praising Diana's leadership and explaining how the crew had been trained to handle discrimination incidents with documentation and professionalism rather than emotion or escalation. Her words provided additional context for viewers who wanted to understand how Diana's response had been both spontaneous and systematic, personal and professional, powerful and restrained. As Richard was escorted through the airport by security personnel, his path was lined with travelers who recognized him from the viral videos already circulating on social media. Some held their phones up to record his passage, while others simply watched with the kind of attention reserved for people who had become symbols of something larger than themselves, whether they had wanted that role or not. The digital explosion was immediate and overwhelming, with the hashtag #HorizonJustice, reaching trending status within an hour of landing as thousands of people shared the videos, praised Diana's response, and discussed the broader implications of what had happened on Flight 847. News outlets were already reaching out to aviation experts, civil rights leaders, and business analysts for commentary on an incident that was being hailed as a defining moment for corporate leadership in the social media age. The emergency board meeting convened in Horizon Airlines Atlanta headquarters within 3 hours of Flight 847's landing, called not to manage a crisis, but to capitalize on what was rapidly becoming the most positive publicity the airline had ever received. Board members joined the virtual session from offices across the country, their screens showing expressions of pride and satisfaction rather than the concern that typically accompanied unplanned gatherings. Diana sat at the head of the conference table in her pilot's uniform, which she hadn't had time to change, despite the media attention and interview requests that had filled every minute since leaving the aircraft. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room that she was conducting corporate business while dressed for the cockpit, a perfect visual representation of the leadership style that had just made Horizon Airlines a symbol of principled management. The stock price has increased 12% since the videos went viral, reported CFO Jennifer Liu, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and delight that was becoming common throughout the company as positive metrics continued to flow in. We're seeing unprecedented booking activity, with reservations up 47% compared to last Tuesday, and customer service is reporting overwhelmingly positive feedback from existing passengers. The social media metrics were even more impressive, with Horizon's official accounts gaining tens of thousands of new followers every hour as people sought to align themselves with a company that had demonstrated its values under the most public possible circumstances. The marketing department was scrambling to keep up with interview requests from major news outlets, all of whom wanted to feature Diana as an example of leadership done right in an era when corporate responses to discrimination often fell short of public expectation. Meanwhile, Richard Coleman was discovering the professional consequences of viral infamy as his pharmaceutical company placed him on immediate administrative leave pending a complete review of his conduct and its potential impact on their corporate reputation. His LinkedIn post about declining airline standards had been screenshot and shared thousands of times, creating a permanent record of his attitudes that no amount of backtracking could erase. His employer's statement was brief but decisive. Coleman Pharmaceutical does not tolerate discriminatory behavior from any employee regardless of their position or performance history. We are conducting a thorough investigation and will take appropriate action based on our findings. The corporate language was carefully neutral, but industry observers understood that Richard's career in pharmaceutical sales was effectively over. The ripple effects extended far beyond Richard's personal consequences as other airlines scrambled to review their own policies for handling passenger discrimination and ensure that their responses would meet the new standard that Diana had established. United, Delta, and Southwest all issued statements reaffirming their commitment to passenger dignity while announcing enhanced training programs for crew members who might face similar situations. The Federal Aviation Administration issued its own statement praising Horizon's handling of the incident and announcing that Diana's response would be studied as part of their ongoing efforts to improve industry standards for passenger treatment. The statement specifically noted that Captain Brooks demonstrated the highest levels of professionalism while maintaining flight safety and passenger security during a challenging situation. Transportation Secretary Maria Rodriguez called Diana personally to commend her leadership and invite her to participate in a federal task force on aviation industry equity and inclusion. "What you did today exemplifies the kind of leadership our industry needs," the secretary said during their phone conversation. "Your response showed strength without vindictiveness, authority without arrogance, and accountability without cruelty." The business media coverage was universally positive, with Harvard Business School professors already incorporating the incident into case studies about crisis leadership and corporate values under pressure. Diana's calm, measured response was being contrasted favorably with other high-profile incidents where executives had failed to meet the moment with appropriate grace and competence. Customer testimonials poured in through every available channel, with passengers from Flight 847 sharing their experiences and praising both Diana's leadership and Sophia's professionalism throughout the incident. Several passengers had already booked future flights with Horizon specifically because of how the situation had been handled, turning a potential public relations disaster into a powerful demonstration of corporate character. The legal implications were being managed with the same systematic approach that Diana had brought to the incident itself, with Horizon's attorneys documenting every aspect of Richard's behavior while ensuring that the company's response remained within appropriate professional boundaries. The documentation would serve as a model for other companies facing similar situations, showing how accountability could be achieved without crossing into vindictiveness or harassment. As the board meeting concluded, Diana looked around the table at colleagues who understood they had just witnessed their CEO operate under the most intense pressure imaginable and emerge with both her integrity and their company's reputation enhanced. The incident had tested everything they claimed to believe about leadership and values, and Diana had proven that those principles weren't just marketing language, but operational reality. The major news networks were in fierce competition to secure exclusive interviews with Diana Brooks, recognizing that her story represented something larger than a single incident touching on themes of leadership dignity, racial justice, and corporate responsibility that resonated with audiences across the political spectrum. CNN, MSNBC, NBC, and Fox News all reached out within hours of the landing, their producers understanding that Diana's grace under pressure had created a rare moment of positive news in a media landscape often dominated by conflict and controversy. Diana's first televised interview was with CNN's Anderson Cooper, conducted in the quiet dignity of Horizon's executive conference room with Atlanta's skyline providing a backdrop that emphasized the heights she had reached through determination and competence rather than privilege or connection. Her responses were thoughtful and measured, focusing on the broader implications of the incident rather than the specific details of Richard's behavior or punishment. What happened today wasn't about one passenger's poor choices, Diana told Cooper, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had guided the aircraft safely through its crisis. It was about demonstrating that when we're all sharing space 30,000 feet above the ground, mutual respect isn't optional. It's essential for everyone's safety and comfort. The interview segments were shared millions of times across social media platforms, with viewers praising Diana's combination of strength and restraint. Her refusal to seek revenge or humiliation for Richard while still holding him accountable for his actions. Comment sections filled with stories from other travelers who had experienced discrimination while flying, creating a broader conversation about dignity and respect in public spaces. Civil rights leaders seized on the incident as an example of how progress could be achieved through competence and grace rather than confrontation and anger, with Reverend Al Sharpton stating that Diana Brooks has shown us how real power operates not through shouting or intimidation, but through excellence and integrity that speak for themselves. The NAACP announced plans to honor Diana at their annual convention, recognizing her as a symbol of breakthrough leadership in corporate America. Congressional interest in the incident grew rapidly, with members of the House Transportation Committee announcing plans to invite Diana to testify about discrimination in the aviation industry and potential legislative solutions. Representative Barbara Lee of California praised Diana's response as a masterclass in leadership under pressure and announced plans to introduce legislation requiring enhanced anti-discrimination training for all commercial airline personnel. The business media coverage was equally positive, with Fortune magazine featuring Diana on its cover under the headline, "Leadership at 30,000 Feet, How Diana Brooks Turned Crisis into Courage." The article detailed her path from discrimination victim to airline CEO, emphasizing how her personal experiences had informed the policies and training programs that enabled her crew to handle the incident with such professionalism. Educational institutions immediately recognized the teaching value of the incident, with Harvard Business School, Wharton, and Stanford all announcing plans to develop case studies based on Diana's response. Professor Michael Chen at Harvard noted that Captain Brooks demonstrated textbook crisis leadership, maintaining professionalism while ensuring accountability, documenting everything while avoiding escalation. The cultural impact extended beyond business and politics into entertainment and social commentary, with late-night comedians praising Diana's response while highlighting the absurdity of Richard's assumptions about who belonged where. The incident became a touchstone for discussions about privilege, prejudice, and the power of competence to overcome both, generating countless memes, commentary pieces, and social media discussions. International media coverage emphasized the global significance of Diana's achievement, with the BBC, Deutsche Welle, and other international outlets featuring her story as an example of American leadership at its best. The contrast between Diana's grace and Richard's prejudice became a symbol of the choice every society faces between inclusion and exclusion, between progress and reaction. The hashtag Horizon Justice continued trending for days after the incident, spawning related hashtags like hashtag Dignity in Flight and hashtag Leadership at Altitude that kept the conversation alive and brought new voices into the discussion. The viral nature of the story ensured that Diana's response would be remembered and referenced for years to come, creating a permanent record of how leadership should respond to discrimination and hatred. In the quiet of her office late that evening, With the media interviews concluded and the phone finally silent, Diana Brooks sat alone with the weight of what had happened and what it meant for her personally, professionally, and symbolically. The city lights of Atlanta stretched out below her windows, each gleaming point representing lives and dreams and struggles that she now represented in a way she had never asked for but couldn't ignore. The calls from family had been overwhelming in their pride and support, with her mother crying on the phone as she watched the CNN interview, telling Diana how proud she was, but also how worried she felt about the additional scrutiny and pressure that would now follow her daughter everywhere she went. "You handled it perfectly, baby," her mother had said. "But now you're carrying more than just your own dreams. You're carrying all of ours." Diana understood the burden of representation that had settled on her shoulders, the reality that every decision she made and every word she spoke would now be interpreted through the lens of this moment when she had chosen grace over anger and education over revenge. She thought about the young black girls who would see her story and dream bigger dreams, but also about the impossible standard she would now be expected to maintain in every future crisis. The personal cost of the day's events was beginning to settle in, not just the exhaustion from managing a crisis while flying an aircraft, but the emotional weight of having her private pain made public, of having to be strong and gracious and inspiring, when part of her just wanted to be angry about the continued necessity of proving her humanity to strangers who should have offered it freely. Richard Coleman's situation weighed on her mind as well, not with sympathy for his consequences, but with the complex understanding that comes from choosing accountability over destruction. His career was over. His reputation ruined his family, probably suffering for his choices, and while Diana felt no responsibility for his consequences, she felt the weight of knowing that her response had contributed to those consequences, and that the power of her position carried responsibilities she couldn't ignore. The messages from other airline executives were pouring in, some seeking advice on how to handle similar situations, others offering partnerships and collaborations, all of them recognizing that Diana had just redefined industry standards for crisis management and corporate leadership. She understood that Horizon Airlines would now be watched more closely than ever, held to higher standards, because of the very excellence that had made today's response possible. The young pilots and flight attendants calling to thank her for representing their profession with such dignity reminded Diana why she had chosen aviation in the first place. Not just for the freedom of flight, but for the opportunity to demonstrate that excellence had no color, gender, or background requirement. Their voices carried hope and inspiration that made the day's challenges feel worthwhile. Sleep would not come easily tonight. Diana knew, not because of stress or worry, but because of the adrenaline that comes from moments when your entire life's work is tested under the brightest possible spotlight and emerges validated. She had spent 15 years building Horizon Airlines into a symbol of excellence and inclusion, and today that symbol had been stress-tested in front of millions of witnesses. The congressional testimony request sat on her desk, representing both an opportunity and a responsibility that would require her to expand her role from CEO to advocate, from business leader to social voice. The invitation carried the potential to create lasting change in how the aviation industry handled discrimination, but also the burden of representing progress and possibility for people who had been denied both for too long. As Diana finally prepared to leave her office, she paused at the window overlooking the runway where aircraft continued their eternal dance of departure and arrival, each flight carrying hopes and dreams and the simple human desire to reach somewhere better than where they started. Tomorrow she would continue building the airline that treated every passenger with dignity, but tonight she allowed herself a moment to appreciate that sometimes individual actions could create ripples that reached far beyond their original scope. The knowledge that children would grow up in a world where Diana Brooks's response to discrimination was documented and available as a model of leadership under pressure provided a sense of purpose that transformed personal challenge into public service. She had been tested today and had responded with the grace and strength that would inspire others long after the immediate controversy faded into history. 6 weeks after Flight 847 had transformed an ordinary Tuesday morning into a viral moment of leadership and accountability. Diana Brooks stood in the ornate chambers of the House Transportation Committee, her pilot's wings glinting under the television lights as she prepared to deliver testimony that would shape federal aviation policy for decades to come. The room was packed with representatives, reporters, and advocates who understood they were witnessing a moment when individual courage was being translated into legislative action. Committee Chairwoman Rosa Martinez called the hearing to order with words that emphasized the historical significance of Diana's appearance. We are here today to examine how the aviation industry can better serve all passengers with dignity and respect. And we are honored to hear from Captain Diana Brooks, whose response to discrimination has set a new standard for leadership under pressure. Diana's opening statement was delivered with the same calm authority that had guided her through the crisis 6 weeks earlier. Her words carefully chosen to honor the experiences of every passenger who had ever faced discrimination, while offering concrete solutions rather than just criticism. Distinguished members of the committee, I appear before you not as someone seeking sympathy for the discrimination I faced, but as someone offering solutions based on what we learned from that experience. The testimony outlined Horizon Airlines' comprehensive Dignity in Flight initiative, a program that would establish new industry standards for crew training, incident documentation, and passenger advocacy that other airlines were already requesting permission to adopt. Diana explained how systematic changes in corporate culture could prevent discrimination incidents rather than just responding to them after damage had been done. The aviation industry has the opportunity to lead other sectors in demonstrating that diversity and excellence are not opposing forces, but complementary strengths that make every organization more effective. Diana told the committee, her voice carrying conviction, born from years of proving that competence transcended prejudice. When passengers board our aircraft, they should feel confident that their dignity is as protected as their physical safety. Questions from committee members revealed bipartisan support for Diana's approach, with representatives from both parties praising her combination of accountability and grace, her refusal to seek revenge while still demanding consequences for discrimination. Representative James Wilson of Texas noted that Captain Brooks has shown us how leadership should respond to prejudice with strength that builds rather than destroys. The announcement of new federal guidelines requiring enhanced anti-discrimination training for all commercial airline personnel was met with sustained applause from the gallery, recognition that Diana's individual response to Richard Coleman's attack had grown into policy changes that would protect future travelers from similar experiences. The guidelines would bear Diana's influence while applying to every airline in the country. Diana's personal story, woven throughout her policy recommendations, illustrated how discrimination could become motivation for excellence rather than excuse for bitterness. How individual achievements could create opportunities for others rather than just personal success. Every time I step into a cockpit, I carry the dreams of young people who have been told they don't belong in the sky, she said, her voice carrying emotion that resonated throughout the chamber. The committee's final questions focused on the broader implications of Diana's leadership style, how her response to crisis could serve as a model for other executives facing similar challenges. Her answers emphasized that true leadership wasn't about avoiding difficult situations, but about handling them with integrity and grace that inspired others rather than intimidated them. As Diana concluded her testimony, she looked out at the packed chamber and spoke directly to the young people watching on television and social media. Your dreams are not limited by other people's prejudices. Excellence speaks louder than ignorance. Competence overcomes assumption, and dignity defeats discrimination every time it's given the chance to fly. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of Diana's testimony, but celebration of a moment when individual courage had created institutional change, when one person's grace under pressure had generated policy reforms that would protect millions of future travelers. As applause filled the chamber, Diana understood that Flight 847 had completed its journey from crisis to consequence to lasting change. 8 months after the incident that had transformed her from successful CEO to national symbol, Diana Brooks stood in the cockpit of a Special Horizon Airlines flight surrounded by 47 aviation scholarship students who had been selected to experience their first time in an aircraft's command center. The students, ranging in age from 16 to 22, represented every background and region of the country, united by their dreams of flight and their inspiration from Diana's example. Among them was 16-year-old Amara Johnson from Detroit, whose essay about Diana's leadership had won her a full scholarship to attend flight school after graduation, her words capturing the impact of seeing someone who looked like her commanding respect through competence rather than demanding it through confrontation. Captain Brooks showed me that the sky doesn't have a color limit, Amara had written, and neither do my dreams. Diana guided each student's hands to the controls, explaining how the various instruments transformed human dreams into mechanical reality. How years of training and study and determination eventually culminated in the ability to safely carry hundreds of lives through the invisible highways of the sky. Her voice carried the same patience and encouragement that her own instructors should have shown 15 years earlier. Flying isn't just about understanding the mechanics, Diana explained to the eager faces surrounding her, their eyes bright with possibility and hope. It's about earning the trust that passengers place in you every time they step aboard your aircraft, about proving through your actions that their faith in your competence was justified. Sophia Martinez, now promoted to Senior Training Director at Horizon Airlines, watched the interaction with pride as she saw her mentor passing on not just technical knowledge, but the values and principles that had made this company a symbol of excellence in an industry still learning how to fully embrace diversity and inclusion. The scholarship program had grown from Diana's congressional testimony into a nationwide initiative supported by major airlines, aerospace manufacturers, and federal agencies, all recognizing that the aviation industry's future depended on attracting talent from every community rather than limiting opportunities to traditional demographics. Hundreds of young people were now pursuing aviation careers they might never have considered without Diana's example. Richard Coleman's name was never mentioned during the flight, but his impact lingered in the positive space. His negative actions had ultimately created his moment of prejudice, having become the catalyst for opportunities and changes that would benefit generations of future aviators. His discriminatory words had inadvertently opened doors for people he had tried to close them on. As the special flight landed back in Atlanta, Diana gathered the scholarship students for a final message that would be recorded and shared with thousands of other young people considering aviation careers. The sky belongs to anyone with the courage to claim it, the dedication to earn it, and the integrity to honor the trust that comes with it, she said, her words carrying the authority of someone who had proven those principles through her own journey. The students left the aircraft carrying signed certificates and personal commitments from Diana to support their educational journeys, but more importantly, they carried the knowledge that excellence was achievable regardless of background, that dreams were valid regardless of who doubted them, and that dignity was something they could maintain even when others tried to strip it away. That evening, as Diana completed her post-flight documentation, she received a message from Amara Johnson. "Thank you for showing me that the captain's seat isn't about who people think belongs there, it's about who's qualified to keep everyone safe while reaching for the sky." 2 years after Flight 847 had changed everything, Diana Brooks sat in the captain's seat of Horizon Airlines' newest aircraft, preparing for the morning departure that had become her regular Tuesday flight from Chicago to Atlanta. A symbolic journey that honored both the route where everything changed and the ongoing commitment to treating every passenger with dignity regardless of their ability to reciprocate that courtesy. The passenger manifest showed the usual mix of business travelers, families, and students. But Diana no longer looked at passenger lists with the defensive awareness that discrimination might be waiting in any seat. instead focusing on the positive responsibility of safely delivering each person to their destination while maintaining the standards that had made Horizon Airlines the most respected carrier in the industry. Tower, this is Horizon 847, requesting clearance for departure. Diana spoke into her headset, the call sign carrying additional meaning that only she and her crew fully understood. A daily reminder that individual moments of grace under pressure could create lasting change when they were supported by systematic commitment to excellence and inclusion. The response came immediately from Air Traffic Control Horizon 847. You are cleared for takeoff. Fly safely, Captain Brooks, and thank you for setting the standard. The tower controllers had made a habit of adding personal acknowledgement to their communications with Diana's flights, understanding that they were working with someone who had elevated the entire aviation industry's commitment to passenger dignity. As the aircraft lifted off into the clear morning sky, Diana felt the familiar joy of flight combined with the satisfaction of knowing that her daily work contributed to something larger than transportation, something that involved demonstrating every day that competence and character could overcome prejudice and assumption. The sky was no longer a refuge from discrimination, but a platform for proving that excellence transcended bias. Captain Williams, still serving as her co-pilot on these symbolic flights, glanced over with the easy familiarity of someone who had witnessed history and continued to be part of its ongoing creation. Another smooth takeoff. Captain, he said, his words carrying both technical assessment and personal appreciation for the leadership he got to observe and support every time they flew together. Through the aircraft windows, the landscape below spread out like a map of possibility, with cities and towns and communities connected by the invisible network of flight paths that Diana had spent her career navigating and was now helping to redefine as spaces where dignity was standard equipment rather than optional upgrade. Every flight was a reminder that progress happened one journey at a time, one passenger at a time, one moment of choosing grace over anger at a time. The autobiography that had grown from Diana's experience, altitude and attitude leadership at 30,000 feet, had become required reading at business schools and leadership programs across the country, its proceeds funding aviation scholarships that were already producing the next generation of diverse pilots and airline executives who would carry forward the values Diana had fought to establish. Today's flight carried 43 passengers who might never know that their captain had become a symbol of leadership under pressure, who would simply experience professional service and safe travel without understanding the broader context of excellence that Diana had worked to create. That anonymity was exactly what Diana had always wanted: the ability to be judged by her competence rather than her story, her performance rather than her past. As Horizon 847 reached its cruising altitude, Diana's voice filled the cabin with the morning announcement that passengers had come to expect. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Brooks speaking. We're cruising at 37,000 feet with clear skies ahead, and I want every passenger to know that your safety, comfort, and dignity are our highest priorities throughout this journey. The words had become ritual, but their meaning remained fresh every time Diana spoke them, a promise that the sky belonged to everyone who had the courage to claim it and the character to share it with respect for their fellow travelers. As the aircraft sailed smoothly toward Atlanta, Diana allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had turned a moment of hatred into a lifetime of hope, that discrimination had become the foundation for dignity, and that sometimes individual actions really could create changes that reached far beyond their original scope. The incident on Flight 847 became a permanent catalyst for change in aviation industry culture, with Diana's dignity protocol being adopted by every major airline within 18 months as federal regulations made comprehensive anti-discrimination training mandatory for all commercial flight personnel. Richard Coleman completed an extensive education program and now works with corporate diversity initiatives, having learned that true leadership builds others up rather than tearing them down, though he remains largely out of public life as a consequence of his actions. Diana Brooks continues leading Horizon Airlines to record-breaking growth while mentoring hundreds of diverse young aviators through scholarship programs funded by her best-selling autobiography. Her congressional testimony led to the landmark Passenger Dignity Act, which established federal standards for respectful treatment of all travelers, regardless of background, creating legal protections that have transformed the flying experience for millions of Americans from all communities and walks of life. Today, when passengers board any Horizon Airlines flight, they are greeted by a simple plaque reading, "Respect flies at every altitude. Welcome aboard." The message serves as a reminder that dignity like flight itself works best when everyone commits to keeping it airborne, and that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination is simply demonstrating excellence so undeniable that prejudice becomes irrelevant in its presence.